Hi, I'm Matt here with State of Flux, and July the 4th be with you. This is the third installment of my countdown of all the Star Wars films that is going to last a full calendar year. This time, here to talk to you about Return of the Jedi, the last episode in the original Star Wars trilogy. And it's quite a strong conclusion, at least in its initial conception. However, time and recent films have kind of made it somewhat a pointless installment, which is kind of weird and sad, right? We'll get into that in a little bit. I'm going to start off by saying this. The first two films, I think, are extraordinary masterpieces. And I think in a lot of ways this one, my feelings on it have changed quite a bit. For a multitude of reasons. When I originally saw this one when I was very, very young, this was my go-to Star Wars movie because it's all payoff, right? The conclusion is so poignant and strong. It has the whole redemption arc that wasn't necessarily set up exceptionally well with the other two, but the payoff of it is very, very strong. Then you have essentially a reenactment of the first movie's climax with the trench run. This time they're inside the Death Star and hitting pipes and stuff like that, which was really exciting. The space battle is the biggest of the original trilogy. And when I was young, I was all about the Ewoks. I thought they were quite fun. I never had a pet growing up, so though I latched onto those. Those were kind of my little pets. And I do have a fondness for the Ewok properties that came out later. I might discuss those in some other future video. But yeah, when I was really young, this was the film I latched onto quite a bit. It was around high school time that I started to see the cracks in the veneer of this film. Because I started learning more about film, I noticed that the tightness of storytelling isn't really present as it was with the first two films, particularly in its act structure. It has three acts. Its beginning act is save Han. Its middle act is set up climax. Its third act is the final battle and the corruption and or of Luke and or redemption of Vader. And the three storylines don't really meet terribly well. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a shaky film, because if you were to just hold up images from the first act of this film and the third act of this film, there is no clear indicator of how we got from here to here. It's just really disjointed. So I started to notice little cracks in the veneer of the makeup of this film, but also the prequels were coming out at that time. So I was seeing the sort of story as a whole with the six parts of the film. At the time when I was really reassessing it, there was only five, because it was around the time Attack of the Clones came out that I started to actually watch these films and dissect them for meaning and things like that. But then a strange thing happened. Revenge of the Sith came out. And I think that Revenge of the Sith does something kind of remarkable. It sets up the climax of this film exceptionally well, because you do get to see the journey of how Luke and Anakin, who are very similar characters, even in levels of whininess, in those first couple of Star Wars movies, you get to see how Luke might actually go Anakin and be tempted by Palpatine. And I like how the two films, Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi, mirror each other very, very strongly. And that really helps strengthen the already strong third act. So after, post Revenge of the Sith, I ended a little stronger on this film than I had been, where I'd been waning for a few years there. The strength came back with the sturdiness of storytelling from Revenge of the Sith in setting up the conclusion of this film, which by and large was never really earned in its original trilogy setting. Like, it was a great twist, it was really cool, but you never really saw how that could happen. I feel like this strengthens it and makes it a little more earned. And then the years went by, and then there was a new trilogy of films. And I think the new trilogy of films have made this film incredibly irrelevant. Because The Force Awakens walks back every accomplishment this film makes, shy of redeeming Anakin. If you were to go from The Empire Strikes Back to The Force Awakens, there's no storytelling that you've really missed, outside of the fact that Darth Vader was eventually redeemed, which they would talk about in The Last Jedi. They don't ever talk about that really in The Force Awakens, to my recollection. So this film does away with the Emperor. It topples the Empire, or so you're led to believe. It makes a hero out of Luke, who stands tall and firm as the Jedi who is going to usher in a new pass on what you have learned from, like, Yoda, all that kind of stuff. And all of that is what we're told. However, what we see in The Force Awakens walks that back entirely. We have the Jedi are fallen. There's no more Jedi anymore except for Luke, who's the last of the Jedi. We have a name change, mere name change of the Empire to the First Order. You have a new big bad who looks virtually the same as Palpatine, at least as shown in The Force Awakens. And I just felt like they wanted us to ignore this film. And that's pretty upsetting. The Last Jedi redeemed that a little bit by discussing the toppling of Palpatine and the redemption of Vader and how that ties into Luke and stuff. And I'll touch on those two movies later. But then the very last of the Star Wars 9 films proper undoes the death of Palpatine. Now, yeah, they've retconned their movie. I guess they don't ever really say how Palpatine comes back, but they've said he was a clone. I don't buy that. The narrative doesn't tell you that. There's nothing in that narrative that tells you that that's not the official Palpatine. And so it like, J.J. Abrams just scrubbed away everything, every beat of storytelling from Return of the Jedi, and I think that does this film a disservice. And if you're watching it as a structural whole, this already somewhat problematic film, or the most problematic film of the original trilogy anyway, is like a pointless viewing. And I will discuss further my problems with those other films later, but what they did to this specific film is absolutely disastrous. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So that's me discussing the legacy of this film. So my feelings have kind of ping-ponged around. I watched it recently with my wee child. And what does work, because when I showed him to her, I showed him the theatrical order of events for the films. Watching it through a child's eyes really kind of helped me land on my final appreciation for this film. I think it's an excellent film that's very problematic and wishy-washy, and as an adult I don't necessarily love the Ewoks as much as I did as a kid, but watching it through her eyes, she loved them every bit as much as I did when I was a kid, so that was kind of sweet. The first act is really cool. I like the getting of Han, but that almost feels like it should have been a short film side quest that they released theatrically ahead of some like Disney movie, or I know this was pre-Disney, but you know what I mean. Like that opening doesn't necessarily feel like it belongs to Return of the Jedi. It just feels like a stagnant side quest that could be its own micro story, a Star Wars short, if you will. The real strength of the movie comes when Luke goes and makes good on his promise to Yoda. That's where the storytelling and the strength of the overall theme of the film with redemption and familial ties and stuff really comes into full swing, and that was really, really cool for me. Watching it with my daughter, to see how they keep affirming that Vader's gone, like there's no good left in him, and Luke is the one that's like, maybe that's not necessarily true. And Willow, my daughter, was not believing that. She was there like, no, he's a bad guy. So when Vader made his turn at the end, she looked at me like in awe. She like that moment was incredibly powerful, and that was always my favorite part of this movie in any way. But that scene played so well watching it through a child's eyes. So yeah, the redemption of Vader is what makes this film work. I think also part of the problem with the screenplay of this film is it loses its narrative. In the sense that it's lost its narrators. The first two films, especially the first film, you have 3PO and R2-D2 who act as narrators in like the old traditional storytelling sense. They're viewing everything, and you're watching everything through their eyes. The story is unfolding through these two incredibly minor side characters. So when you get the second movie, virtually every scene when you're with the heroes includes one of those two characters, so that method of storytelling continues. By the time you get to this one, 3PO and R2-D2 kind of more and more get pushed out of the story, and they kind of pay it off a little bit in the second act when 3PO is recanting the whole story, acting as genuine narrator to the Ewoks. So you get a touch of that there, but the movie is definitely no longer framed through the eyes of the droids. And I think that because of that, it kind of feels a little less Star Warsy. And it's weird because this movie opens with the two droids once more, just like that first film did. But yeah, this also one of the problems that you get with the third part of a trilogy is oftentimes the middle movie, which is oftentimes the best of the three movies, is by and large ignored. Like the themes and character dynamics that happen from the second movie as they carry into the third one are all there. The themes and stuff are present, but the callbacks to that individual movie are almost non-existent, almost as if it hasn't happened. If you watch, say, Spider-Man, Spider-Man is an excellent example of this. Spider-Man 1, 2, 3. 3 is very much a sequel to part 1. Almost no discussion of what happened in part 2, yet 2 is the strongest feature. This kind of might be the movie where that trend started. Because framework-wise, this feels like a rehash of the first movie in a lot of ways. It starts on Tatooine with the droids as they're trying to accomplish their task and acquire Han Solo. Then they acquire plans to destroy a Death Star. So the time for the attack has come. That scene plays out basically as it did in the very first movie, and then you have another attack with another Death Star, and that whole run. And then you have the difference this time is it has the emotional weight of your attachment to these characters from the other two, but it comes from like sequelitis, where it's basically a reimagining or retelling of the first movie and or a direct sequel to the very first movie. And as I say, cracks in the veneer of this film are pretty apparent. Yet, its emotional heft really works, and I think that comes down to the performances that they pull from the characters. You really see how these actors have grown. Mark Hamill, is sort of the unsung hero of performance in these three films. Nobody really talks about how great he is. They have a little more in recent years, but at the time, like, your focus is always on Harrison Ford because he's the most charismatic one. But Mark Hamill really shows his growth as an actor between the three films and is really quite good, especially by the end of this one. Carrie Fisher as well. Even though Leia and Han don't have a whole lot to do in this movie. Again, the screenplay for this one is on the weaker side, which is genuinely unfortunate. I feel like they could have done one more pass at it. Han Solo is a stagnant character. His arc in this film is flat. He's just riding on coast from his growth at the end of the second movie. And then Leia, who's always been relatively active, especially in the first two movies, she has an active duty in this. She participates in the freeing of Han, but once she's kidnapped by the Ewok, she really just drops out of the story entirely. And I feel like were this being written today, they would have made her a much more active participant. And this is something that is repeated in the prequel trilogy. You have a very active character for two films, with Amidala, who kind of disappears largely to be, the wife figure in the third one. That's neither here nor there. Luke really is what sells this movie, and it's the performances of Mark Hamill, Frank Oz, Alec Guinness, and James Earl Jones Vader, as well as David Prowse inside the costume of Vader. Those are the things that really sell this movie. There's a lot of great little side performances and wonderful little characters. I'd be remiss if I didn't discuss Admiral Akbar and It's a Trap! Iconic now. But the things, when this movie works, it hits like grand slams. But when you get to that middle portion of the film, it really drags, and that's where it's easy to start actually paying attention to the flaws of the film. One of the other things I talked about pretty at length with the previous two is the look of the films. So the first movie, I think wisely so, had a camera that was pulled back, just let you observe everything. There's no movement to almost any of the camera work in that film unless you're in the space battles. He just sort of, Lucas opted to have the film framed in a way that you could experience a whole wide world. When Irvin Kershner came in the second one, he was all about creating atmospheric lighting. He was about making the film a visual medium. The look of that second film is just spectacular. When you think of Star Wars, you think of the visuals associated with that second film. And the camera moves, it sweeps, it has a cinematic look to it. Return of the Jedi is really bland looking. Like, it's colorful. I like the nice greens, the rich greens, and the tans in the sand. And so when you go, the laser, like the special effects had gotten to a point where I think George Lucas was satisfied and got the vibrant colors of the lasers and the swords and stuff like that to a really good place. But stripping that stuff away, the film is kind of an ugly movie. The camera doesn't move. You don't have too many like close-ups or anything like that. The visual storytelling in the movie is pretty lackluster, especially when standing next to The Empire Strikes Back. and that is, I don't know if that comes from director Richard Marquand, who did this film. I'm not really familiar with his body of work, and sadly he passed away not terribly long after this film. But the decision to not continue the dynamic look that was established in that second film it kind of does that a disservice, but also harkens back to the marrying of this film to A New Hope on how they kind of both look similar. So you have a weird regression that happened there. But I want to focus on the good parts. As I mentioned before, the Jedi characters are all handled with extreme care, and they're beautifully done. The performances by those 4 to 5 actors who brought those 4 Jedi characters to life did an exceptional job. Ian McDiarmid was introduced in this film as Emperor Palpatine, and from the moment that he is brought in, he steals every single scene. He is so much more wicked than Darth Vader, who, to that point, had been the most wicked character to ever grace a film like this. And he does so with just, like, deliciousness. Ian McDiarmid is amazing in this film, and I'll be happy to talk more about him with later installments. And then we have the returning characters, and I kind of dinged Han and Leia a little bit, but that nothing to do performance-wise. Harrison Ford is quite good, though he does seem like he's checked out a little more than he had been in the previous 2, where he was fully committed. Carrie Fisher is quite great in this film, very lovely performance from her, and John Williams' score for Luke and Leia, as well as Leia and Han, like both of those scores are just absolutely lovely. He really brings it this time around. All 3 of those original trilogy films John Williams soared with, but the score to this one particularly is very strong. And Billy D. Williams back as Lando is quite fun. Had I been writing it, I probably would have had Han Solo in the Millennium Falcon during the trench run, and that would have been the logical place to, kill him. But I feel like this film suffers from the weight of no casualties. Like, yeah, the old characters finally pass away, all of them in this film, but none of the original trilogy main leads really get killed. I would have sacrificed somebody. I know Harrison very much wanted to die in this film, and that would have been the place to do it. I feel like when you're making a war film, you should feel the weight of loss, and you don't really get those. You got more of a weight of loss when Luke lost his hand and found out Vader was his father than any moment in this film. There's no I think that's what, when this film originally came out and when I viewed it as a kid, there's no suspense towards the climax of the film, because you don't believe that Luke is going to die. It's unlikely that he's going to turn bad. Like, when I was watching it as a kid, I never once had a thought that maybe he would even remotely turn evil. I just was surprised that Vader redeemed himself. With the prequel knowledge, it makes it a little more, like, that's when you start to view it and you're like, oh, his character mirrors Anakin's exceptionally closely. So that maybe it is plausible he could go dark. And Mark Hamill gives that performance that kind of walks that edge. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling. This film I do love, and will watch quite often, but I do think that its legacy has been tarnished pretty heavily. And just from a film appreciation level, it isn't terribly strong when standing next to the 2 almost perfect films that came before. That said, as the conclusion to a trilogy, had this been it, had there been no other Star Wars movies, had it just been the holy trinity of the the original trilogy, which is kind of funny that it is about a father, a son, and a Holy Ghost. I think the conclusion to this was exceptionally strong. It's just when you bring other films into it that it kind of loses its strength. But as a conclusion, it gets you there. It's emotional. I'm not gonna lie, I definitely cried. Having watched this with my daughter, I asked her who her favorite characters were, and she loved Wedge, and that Wedge had a bigger role in this. She loved the Ewoks. She was surprised with the whole Vader thing. The redemption arc. She really didn't like the Emperor. She thought he was bad. She was concerned that Luke was going to die when he was being electrocuted and stuff. She was like all tense. So that did work for her. So yeah, watching it through a kid's eyes is kind of fun, as I say. But yeah, I'm going to give this movie a 3.5 out of 4 stars. It's so good. It is almost there, but there is just enough that I can ding this movie. I used to give all 3 of the original films 4 stars just kind of for the sake of doing it, even though I had more problems with this one. I can't really bring myself to give it 4 stars anymore because of the amount of problems and the level of problematic that it is for me. That said, it is exceptionally good when it is good. 3.5 stars. The scenes that are great in this film are better than any scenes that came before in the original trilogy. But its weakest spots are far weaker than any moment in either of the previous 2 other films. So that's that. Last note about the special edition. I am torn. I get why people don't really like the Cy Snoodle song. I honestly don't care one way or the other with the 2. Even as a young kid, I always felt that she looked a little animatronic-y, even though I think she was a marionette, basically. So I like that they gave her a little more life. Not in love with the song, but whatever. And then cutting ahead to... Oh, and I do like the beak that they gave the Sarlacc pit monster. That's pretty cool. I will absolutely defend the new Ewok song. I think the ending song of this is considerably better than the Celebrate the Love song. If you listen to it, I promise you, go back, listen to the Ewok song, the Yub Nub song from the original cut of Return of the Jedi. It freeze frames on the whole cast while a chorus behind them sings Celebrate the Love, Celebrate the Love. Why people think that's the better ending, beyond me. Just no. It is a catchy song and it's cute, and I've played it for Willow and she likes it. But I think thematically the ending that you get here works so much better. I like seeing the cities that you were given before. I don't even mind going back to Naboo. I wish you wouldn't have heard a gun screaming, but whatever. And I also don't mind Hayden being inserted. So I'm kind of indifferent to this. I do think the one thing that this film did exceptionally better with the special edition is the new song that Williams composed. And my very last thing that I want to talk about is Boba Fett. I've never understood the appeal of that character. A lot of people adore him because he's a really cool looking toy, and then they wrote some arguably good books about him in the EU, but I've never understood the appeal of the character. I love the fact that he was arbitrarily killed off. That made me laugh, because not everybody deserves like this iconic death moment, especially for a character who had almost no dialogue. I like that he was just accidentally killed. It's kind of brilliant. That was one of my favorite parts, and recently they undid that too. Everything in this movie has been undone. So yeah, I guess F Return of the Jedi. But I wish, in my heart of hearts, Boba Fett is dead in that Sarlacc pit, or ever trying to get out of it. He has never gotten out in my mind. that said, I'll probably talk about the Book of Boba Fett at some point in reviewing in years to come. Anyway, my favorite scene of this movie was the redemption of Vader. What is your favorite scene? Do you have anything? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think this movie is the most perfect of the Star Wars films? I know it used to be for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people are beginning to see the cracks in its veneer as time went on as well. What are your thoughts? Drop them in the comments below. And catch you next month where we talk about the prequel films. Have a good night. I don't know why I said have a good night. What if you're watching this in the morning? I'm rambling, but be gone with you. It's a line from the prequels, which are coming soon. I'll stop.